Thanks, Chair. Just to start, Minister, I suppose I just want to say that I'm really glad that you're before the committee today, because I think it's abundantly clear that there is a huge disconnect between what the department is doing and what the department needs to do for people with disabilities to be able to realise their rights. Disability, employment and social protection are very complex areas, and their interactions can either empower people or disadvantage people, and the approach of this government and previous governments is literally just not working. We have one of the highest rates of poverty and social exclusion for people with disabilities in the EU at 38.1%, while at the same time we have the lowest employment rate of people with disabilities at 32.3%. The system needs flexibility to help people work and receive state payments instead of sharp cliff edges, which can make those working less well off, and those who will have no choice other than carers allowance and disability allowance need a guaranteed standard of living. We don't have that. Disability allowance is currently €208. This compares to the pandemic unemployment payment benchmark of €350 for cost of living. And this disparity isn't just an exercise in comparing figures. That is the lived reality of so many disabled people and carers in Ireland. There's a significant added cost to having a disability. We know that, you know that, your department knows that, everybody knows that, and yet is €208 a week is the payment. Okay. Underlying all of this is the absence of a rights-based approach and a medicalised model of disability, and there's little consideration of the individual and insufficient flexibility to enable independent living. I have to say that I was speechless listening to you speak about the ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities in 2018, because we were the last country to do that, 10 years too late, and we still haven't ratified the optional protocol of the UN Convention, so it's not something to be reaming off almost as if it's something to boast about. And then of major concern to this committee is the disability allowance in relation to where more applications are refused than accepted initially, and then on appeal almost 2/3 are granted. And again, it seemed like you're reaming it off like it was something, those figures were something that the department should be proud of. That demonstrates a very obviously over-restrictive approach to the application process. And in response to Deputy Tully said that consistently it's that the medical information is a problem. Then what is the department doing to make that easier for people to fill out? It is unacceptable that more than half of the applications are refused, and then on appeal, almost 2/3 of them are granted. That just doesn't make any actual sense. And how is the department not looking at it and saying, how do we make sure this doesn't happen anymore? Instead of looking and going, oh, well, people aren't filling out their medical information correctly. What is the department doing to address that situation? And then a significant issue with the disability allowance, like I said, is the lack of flexibility. Last week, Disabled Women Ireland talked about how many disabled women in part-time or temporary employment are fearful that additional work, such as covering a colleague's sick leave, or in the case of artists accepting a commission, for example, results in them crossing restrictive thresholds that result in withdrawals of their supports. This is the opposite of a rights-based approach. We need a system that can holistically consider individuals and have flexibility to allow them temporarily increase their income without affecting their payments. Like we said, we know there's an added cost to having a disability, so the €208 is really less than the bare minimum. Any additional work should not affect that very, very small inadequate payment. Also, just on that, what is your view on raising the threshold of earnings disregard for disability allowance by €20? The social model of disability understands that society creates the disability. Our systems and our buildings are the barriers. The density and complexity of the social protection system is disabling people. Digital literacy issues, access to IT equipment means online platforms can be accessible, while at the same time paper applications can be difficult to access. So all social protection forms should be available in plain English and consistent. For example, the enhanced illness benefit form online is much more simple than the paper version. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's encountered this. And forms such as the illness benefit and back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance are not available for download. So there are obvious barriers which you're aware of, which the department are aware of, but they're also very easy solutions. So will you commit to all forms being available in plain English and being available online? Then the pandemic highlighted issues of digital poverty. So would you update the household benefit package and telephone support allowance to include support for internet services, broadband and hardware such as laptops and tablets as soon as possible? And finally, Inclusion Ireland have suggested the recruitment of job coaches for intro offices to provide on-the-job support to enable those with high support needs to obtain and maintain employment. Their assessment is that such supports are not currently in place. What is your view on such an approach?
Thanks, Holly. Minister.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I thank the Deputy for her comments. I don't agree with them, to be honest with you, the most of them. I think you have selectively picked out everything you could possibly do and tried to point out that it's wrong. Can I just tell you that I'm very proud of what I have done in this department since I came in here just a year and a half ago. The first budget in 2021, I increased the carer support grant to the highest level ever to €1,850, and that was paid in June to all carers. This year, in 2022, the second budget in my department that I have headed up, I reformed the carers allowance means test in terms of the capital disregard, the weekly income disregard. That went from 20,000 to 50,000. The first time it had been changed in years. The weekly income went from $350 per week up to $350 per week for a single person and $750 per week for a couple, and that kicks in June. So, so that means that a person could have 50,000 in the bank. One person could be earning €750 per week, and they still get the carers allowance of up to €224 per week. And when we make our decision on the Pensions Commission report, it's a priority for me to provide a pension for carers. So that's just one thing. Now, just in terms of the medical information, just to tell you, Deputy, it's actually the doctor fills up the medical information. We're not asking the applicant to fill it up. So we have found that the main reason that an application is turned down is because the medical information hasn't been provided. Most people go back to their doctor to get clarification, and when it's processed again, and I've seen that in my constituency office, I'm not sure, I'm sure you've seen it in yours too, when the correct medical information goes in, the application can be approved. But you can't make a decision on an application if you don't have the information. And again, it's not the applicant, it's the medic that completes it. And as well as that, we have also simplified the application form to make it easier for people to complete it. And can I just also say, we're not in the business of putting barriers in front of people to get supports. Just to be clear, we are here to help people. And we have done that through the pandemic with almost $9 billion worth of supports. And for you to say that we are trying to put obstacles in the way of people in getting their payments or their entitlements or their supports is absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I can stand over that as I sit here and talk about the staff in social protection. They're there to help. I have met them. I was in Sligo where there's 600 staff employed. I met those staff, and each one of them are there to help people, and that's what they do. So, and that's what we're here to do as well, to make sure that people get the support they needed when they need it, and particularly people with disabilities. Now, I'll just go on and give you some information on the appeals that you mentioned. First of all, there was 28,158 decisions made. 13,289 of those were granted. 10,500 were granted on the first attempt. They got them straight away, just processed straight away. There was 5,575 appeals out of the 28,000, and 2,712 of those were allowed. Now, some people don't qualify for the disability allowance for whatever reason, and the terms and conditions are clearly set out, and we have ease some of the, or change some of the conditions, and we'll continue to look at them to see what we can do. But we have to put things into perspective here, because we have limited resources, and we continue to review all of these things coming up to the budget, and I'll continue to do that. I'll also continue with my officials to engage with the disability sector, which I have done in the past, and I'll continue to do in the future. So I think, Deputy, you have, to say then, of course, that 208 is the payment, is the basic payment, but you're not including the household benefit there. For many, they get the fuel allowance. For others, they get the free travel, and then, of course, there's the medical card. So there's a number of other supports out there, but we want to do more, and we will continue to do more. Now, I accept the Eurostat estimates, and we have targets to reduce this in the roadmap for social inclusion, and we'll continue to work on all of those things and do everything we can to support people with disabilities. But the most important thing I want to see is to try and help people who can go back to work, because that empowers them. That gives them an income. It gives them an independence, and that's what we want to do. There's a huge support there for employers who take on people with disabilities, and I want to highlight that more. And I think perhaps maybe this committee could also use your good offices to tell people what's available, take up those supports, and encourage them to work through the employability service. I've met people who work in that. And sometimes it's that connection that the employability services provide between the employer and the employee. And I heard a particular case where an employee couldn't go into work on a Friday because he had to actually attend an addiction service. He didn't know how he was going to tell his employer that, and he wasn't going to go back to work because of that. But he was able to go to somebody in the employability service that were able to have that conversation and sort out that problem. And every Friday morning he got whatever number of hours he needed to go to attend the service. These are the things we need to do. We need to work together to alleviate some of these problems and to help people and empower them to get back to work. So I think I've addressed most of your issues, Deputy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just come back in very briefly, Chair, please?
Okay, no bother, Holly.
Yeah, just to be clear, Minister, I'm obviously not putting any blame on staff in offices. I'm not putting any blame on doctors filling out the forms. I'm literally just highlighting the fact that the system is not working. There's obviously a dysfunctional system or an overly restrictive system there. If over half of the people who apply are refused, and then on appeal, almost 2/3 are granted. So if it is that there's an issue with doctors filling out the forms, what needs to be done to make that more accessible for them? How is it that so many of these applications are refused and then granted? And when you talk about, oh, well, there's other, benefits available to people, like, we know that the added cost of having a disability from the report is 9,000 to 12,000 annually. And, that's obviously a bare minimum. Very much depends on the disability, on other circumstances, all of those things. So, there's fuel allowance and different things. It's just not enough. And you can tell us all day that the system isn't a barrier for people, but it's completely meaningless when we have the highest rates of poverty in the EU for people with disabilities at 38.1%. And it's not that I want to come in here and point fingers at you and blame. I'm trying to highlight the reality of the situation, what people are experiencing on the ground, so the department can please try and work to improve that. There is a blatant problem with the application system when that is the reality of the amount of appeals and the amount of granted applications after appealing, and then when we have the highest rate of poverty in the EU for people with disabilities. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Sally. Minister, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I do, please. Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I think there's confusion over these figures. 28,150 decisions were made. As I said, 13,000 of those were granted. 2,700 appeals were allowed by the appeals office, so that's 10% of the overall decisions were agreed in the appeals office. And can I just say that some people don't meet the medical conditions of the scheme set out in the Act, if they don't meet them, and some people don't actually meet the conditions of the scheme, we have to have checks on any scheme that we roll out in this department. We have to have criteria within which people have to comply with, and some people just don't meet them, and that's the reality. And unfortunately, if they can appeal it, so out of the 28 decisions, there was 5,575 appeals, and out of the 575 appeals, 2,712 were granted. So those are the facts, and 80% of awarded claims were given by DSP, and 20% were given by the appeals office. Just 10% of decisions made were claims granted by the appeals office. So 10% of the decisions were granted by the appeals office. So I just wanted to clarify that. So that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Jennifer Murnane O'Connor.